Michael. You ready to do it?
Ready?
Okay, here we go. So 5,
right.
4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Michael Baly. Michael, welcome.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
All right. So Dr. Baly is a clinical psychologist who works with adolescents and adults with a range of concerns and goals. He specializes in helping individuals address the effects of complex trauma, attachment wounds, and ongoing relational stress. He received a BA from Harvard University and a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Virginia. Dr. Baly is a founding partner and former clinical director of Encore Outpatient Services, an integrated treatment facility focused on helping individuals recover from co-occurring trauma and substance use disorders. Dr. Baly is certified sensorimotor psychotherapist and is in the process of becoming a sensorimotor psychotherapy consultant. He's additionally received extensive training in EMDR, dialectical behavior therapy, and motivational interviewing. Dr. Baly, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. So before we get going here, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm from Northern New Jersey, born and raised there, and now I live in Washington, D.C. I practice in Virginia, but I live in D.C., pretty close to the capital.
All right. Awesome. So
yeah.
how the heck did you get into this field? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. It's funny because I have a lot of friends that kind of knew what they wanted to do, colleagues that knew what they wanted to do. I did not. This was not on my radar probably until my late 20s. I didn't really know. I hadn't gone to therapy. I didn't really know much about psychology and therapy. I didn't study psychology in undergrad. After undergrad, I was pretty lost. Dabbled with some different things, and then became a teacher. And I decided pretty quickly that probably wasn't going to be what I was going to do. It was just too hard. I mean, teachers are, to me, it's the hardest job in the world to be a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
But I really like talking to the students. I was in New York City. I really like talking to the students, getting to know them, and a position. So I was a classroom teacher for a couple of years, and then a position opened up that was called a crisis intervention teacher, and that was, basically, as the name implies, you would go when there were crises in the school, fights, problems in the classroom. You would go and intervene, try to de-escalate the situation, and then counsel the kids afterwards. And I really liked that, but I pretty quickly felt like I need to know more. Like I'm not equipped to do this. I got training in it. I got really good training in it, but I wanted to know more. And so then I went back I applied to clinical psychology grad schools. And even at that time, I was like, I'd done a little bit of research, but I didn't know what I was getting into. I was like, I just know that I want to do more.
Well, let me interrupt you there, if I may.
Go ahead.
So you said you started out teaching in New York City.
Yeah.
Which sounds crazy. I mean, right? It sounds really hard in and of itself.
It was really hard. Yeah.
And then,
go ahead.
And then this crisis intervention thing sounds also intense, but something about it pulled you.
Yeah, it was great. In fact, I mean, I slept really well. I was busy all day. But, for me, it didn't have you were just in the moment all the time, in the moment, and that's, probably similar. I mean, I don't want to equate the two, but being like an emergency room doc where you're going from one thing to the next. It was really engaging, but I often felt like I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm affecting change, right? I'm helping. This is exciting. It's fun. I'm getting to know kids better. But I felt like I needed to know more. I was just kind of scratching the surface. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then you were like, I want to go to graduate school.
Yep.
Okay. So keep going.
Okay. So go to graduate school. Still, I think pretty naive about, I think everyone that I knew was like, oh, this is what I want to do. I know this is who I want to study with. This is what, this is my passion. And it was my passion. I was still pretty new to understanding what I was getting into. And go through graduate school, dabble in some different things. I was in a research lab where we studied youth violence, did a lot of research on threat assessment, did a lot of research on bullying. Really was in New York City that I got in close contact with working with people with trauma, although I don't even know if I knew that that's what was going on at the time. I had a sense, but probably didn't have words to it. Graduated and still was feeling, got my PhD, had written my dissertation, and still was feeling like, I don't know what orientation is me. I don't know, I still don't feel like I've got a roadmap. I had learned lots of different things, but still, and maybe still do a lot of the time, feel like I know what I'm doing, but this job will do that to you. But I think it wasn't until I had started focusing more on working with people with self-injurious behaviors, suicidality, addictions, and compulsions that I realized that probably trauma, the realm of trauma, attachment issues is probably what I wanted to focus on. Because once you get into that, once you start working with people with addictions or compulsive or self-destructive behaviors, you realize, well, it's all about trauma, right? It's all about, and in that world also, it's a lot of, working with people that might carry a diagnosis of maybe borderline personality disorder. And you start connecting the dots and realizing that, there's origin stories that everybody had to the development of some of these adaptations that are just no longer serving them anymore. And I'd gotten really into DBT, which I really liked, and still a big fan of DBT, but I still felt like I'm not sure if this is what is a fit for me. That was probably the most helpful training and learning that I had done up until that point. And then I took a trauma certificate course at the trauma center that was developed by Bessel van der Kolk and some of his people. And that's when I first got introduced to sensorimotor psychotherapy at that time. That was probably about 8 years ago now at this point. And that really, knowing that there was this whole other world of things that I had never learned before and that they didn't really talk about in grad school, that I kind of had to speak out for myself. And then I became a clinical director at a substance use treatment facility where a lot of people are coming in with histories of trauma. And at that point, I decided, I think I was at a psychotherapy networker event, and they had Sensorimotor had a booth there, and I was like, I got to do this, because everything I'd read about it, I was like, this sounds like it's me. It really spoke to me.
Why? How?
I think because when I I remember the first weekend of level 1. I think that it was the acceptance that I didn't necessarily need to know all the answers. I didn't have to be the authority. The most important part of it was being able to be present. Not necessarily the most important part, but an important aspect is that kind of present moment experience and attunement with somebody else, being able to connect with them on a more emotional or like maybe right brain to right brain level, where it's more about feeling, it's more about sense. And what you're really doing is just noticing and tracking and connecting and contacting them so that they can start doing that for themselves, right? Because everything that they need is actually already within them in order to heal. So this sense of, oh, I don't need to have like a really smart thing to say. In fact, it's frowned upon to sit and give these like lengthy analyses and insights where like, I'm going to be really smart and you're going to be like, wow, that's really interesting. And then you're going to leave and nothing will have changed, right?
Right, exactly.
But I'll feel good about being smart if I can, And so that level of stress of like, oh, I actually, if I can focus on being present with this person, that's the most effective thing I can do. or one of the most effective things I can do. And I don't have to work so hard at intellectualizing and having and being the authority and having all the answers for people.
So it's very interesting to me, Michael, because you talked about your path, your kind of quest to find out like what is going to resonate with me, where am I going to fit? What's not that one modality is just going to resonate with you.
Right.
But as you were on that journey, what were you not finding? What wasn't settling with you?
I think I noticed in my therapy sessions, I think it's not like I didn't help people, but I felt like I was, I'd get to points in the course of therapy with people. And a lot of times at that point, prior to getting trained in sensorimotor, I was working with a lot of adolescents. And I love that. And I think I was good. And I think I am good at that. But I felt like I was hitting walls, and it's hard to explain, but I felt like we would get to a place where, oh, we're building relationship, there's some progress being made, and then we'd reach a plateau where like, well, we can keep talking about this. And we can keep on coming up with plans and these different, pieces of homework that maybe you're going to try, experiments, that you're going to try, and after you leave here, and maybe you'll do it sometimes and maybe you won't. And that's still the case, but just the talking about it, we'd reached a point where, okay, clearly there's something that we're missing in terms of being able to take the next step for someone. And I think that, what I discovered and what I continue to discover is that it's really the implicit realm. It's really the part of the brain that's nonverbal, right? That holds this old software that adapted to, whether it's one trauma or an environment or a period of development, that, as I think Kikuni Minton would say, like, maybe it wasn't just him the first time, but would say it needs updating. But you can't update it by just talking about it, because they don't, the talking about it brain is a different part of the brain.
So can you offer an example of how you might integrate, say, that SPI work with an adolescent that maybe you'd hit a wall with? What would that next step be for you then? What might
that's
that
a good
look
question.
like?
I mean, yeah. And I find, for example, recently with some, I've got one adolescent who, I think initially, a lot of adolescents don't want, it's not their choice, right? Even if they're okay with coming, they weren't the one driving that decision to come, even if they know that they might need some help or have a problem. And that's true for some adults as well. And, who, a lot of times it's like experimenting with trying something different, right? They maybe have gone to a different talk therapist and that didn't work, and that's why they didn't want to come to somebody else, just talk to somebody else in a room. And that something different is experimenting with something where maybe we're not talking, right? Where I'm kind of guiding them or directing them. And it's not necessarily guiding like a guided meditation, but it's in the context of, oh, something just happened right here. You looked down and made a face, right? Let's exaggerate that, what just happened, that posture, right? And let's just check out what happened, right? So for a lot of times, I guess the short answer is, hey, let's just experiment with something, right? Where we're going to notice what happens afterwards, and maybe it sticks, maybe it doesn't, maybe you think it's stupid, but I'm not going to sit here and necessarily talk to you and tell you, what to do, or what's wrong with you, or here's what needs to happen next for you to get quote unquote better, right? Let's just see about, can we be a different way with one another? And so, that might be exaggerating some type of response. It might be like, hey, you sit in my seat, let's see how that feels. It might be like, let's go into a different room, because I do have access to different rooms here. It it could be a number of different things. You know, it could be like, let's just like hang out and like draw together. You know, I mean, and lots of other therapists do things like that too outside of sensorimotor. But what I learned was different techniques for helping people to direct their attention and tune into changes so that they can have that like different experiential like knowing of like, oh, this is different.
Right. Well, it sounds very creative to me too. You know, like you're opening up to all these other avenues, like whereas before, maybe you felt like, you know, that proverbial wall was, okay, I've done everything I can do. What do I need to do next? Or so
I think that's right.
Very cool. All right. So how did things unfold in terms of your relationship with SPI, your interest in SPI, sensorimotor psychotherapy?
You know, for me, and I think this has been disrupted by the pandemic, which a lot of things have, but I had a cohort of people that I just felt like, and a large group of people that I traveled through level 1 to level 2 to level 3, and then getting certified, where you know, to a certain extent, it sounds cliche, but I felt like these are my people, right? So almost immediately, I remember after, you know, the first weekend of level 1, I said, well, I'm definitely doing level 2, you know, and then after first weekend of level 2, I was like, well, I'm definitely going to do level 3, you know, and then I'll be a master, right? Which is not the case, but there's so much to learn, and I think that's part of the thing that keeps me tethered to it. Partly is the community of people, that container, that holding space of like, hey, we're in this together and we're learning together. But it's also, as a lot of therapies are, it's in process. It's still developing. It's not a finished product. And I don't know if it would ever be. And that's pretty exciting, and also kind of reassuring that we don't have to have all the answers and be a finished product.
You said you worked with adolescents. You like working with adolescents. What do you feel makes you good at working with that population?
I don't know exactly. I do think I tend to be able to empathize. Not that I can't empathize with adults. I work with adults as well, but I tend to be able to really take myself back and see so many parts of myself in what they might be experiencing, where like even, you know, some type of rage or telling me off at different times, or, you know, I can it's easier for me to kind of sit and smile at that and welcome that as some type of adaptation or reaction that maybe is happening between the two of us, or that it's some way that they need to be right now. So I can soften in those situations. I find myself being able to soften a little bit more easily. So that comes a little more naturally than, and I can do that with everyone, but for some reason it comes more naturally with teens and maybe young adults as well.
It's interesting to me because you said, you know, when you were working earlier on with like that emergency crisis unit, which required kind of being in the moment, you know, I think adolescence too requires, and not unlike a lot of other populations, but really being in the moment and being able to be super present, you know, because they have those like really sharp BS detectors, you know.
100%. You can't be inauthentic with an adolescent.
So all right, so you're currently at Ekoe, Ekoe. Talk a little bit about that and what you're doing there.
Well, it's a fairly new endeavor. It's myself and right now 3 other close colleagues of mine that we're all in private practice around one another. 3 of us actually went to the same grad school, went to UVA together, have kind of hung around one another. And, you know, I think, you know, practicing closely with one another, but still separately in our own private practices at the outset of the pandemic, and with, kind of recognizing different things that were happening in the world, different communities, kind of during the pandemic and that are continuing to happen, we just felt like the need to form our own community. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what Ekoe is about, we talk about embodied collective healing, that first of all, other therapists, that none of us are good in, I'm not going to be as good in private practice as I might be in like a collective of people that I can grow with. Mm-hmm. And so this is the idea of like, can we at least be, a space for other therapists, for other helpers, that can, whether it's learning from us or us learning from them, to grow, to have containers with one another, but then also hopefully provide, similar, parallel spaces for, for people in the community, for clients, to be able to have both maybe individual and maybe systems therapies as well as, groups and workshops. So the idea that, I have felt like part of the missing piece that gets in the way of me being able to, affect change or help someone change is that a lot of times I was just doing that on my own, and they were doing that we were doing it on our own. And it might be helpful to have some other networks to help that person connect, to heal in connection, because healing doesn't necessarily happen outside of connection.
So are you folks acting as like a consultation group in a sense?
That's one of the functions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. And people can learn more about that by going to what? Ekoe healing.com, ekohealing.com. Right. We'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So in terms of SPI, body-based therapies in the trauma world, is interesting and sad to hear you say, but not uncommon that trauma just is it being taught in any greater capacity now in graduate schools?
I don't, I'm sure it is. I mean, I would think it would have to be, because I find that a lot of younger, and I'm not necessarily all that much more experienced than a lot of other people, but a lot of people that are getting into the field now, have that language where they're understanding that no matter what I choose to go into, some type of niche or specialty, I'm very likely going to be coming across people that have been traumatized. Right. And so I would think it would have to be, and I don't know why it's not. It is a little bit frustrating. I often, and I had a great experience in my program. I learned a ton, but oftentimes there is this dichotomy between, okay, well, there's the CBT camp or the cognitive behavioral camp, and then there's maybe psychodynamic camp. And you learn kind of generally about those two orientations. But I often felt like what I really needed was more kind of specific techniques and guidance, and more of a roadmap for dealing with people, or not dealing with people, but for helping people. And that's really what I thought that I think that I got from SPI, was a map that was flexible enough for me to allow for organicity to happen, to take different avenues, but I also am contained and I've got different directions that I know that I can go in.
What do you say? So there are a lot of therapists of varying degrees and experiences listening to this. What do you say to people when they're like, okay, there's so many modalities out there. How do I start? What do I need to do?
That's a really good question. I think for me, in my experience, and I think the other thing that happened for me with SPI, with sensorimotor psychotherapy, was I benefited from receiving that type of therapy, and I tried other things as well. I tried EMDR. I had tried, other kind of more, cognitive behavioral therapies, other approaches, more traditional talk therapies. And for me, it was actually, you know, it spoke to me because it was the most helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
But to a certain extent, I think a certain amount of experimentation typically is necessary for people to figure out what's going to be a good fit for them, because you can read all about something, but
Right.
until you actually either experience it or give it a try. That being said, I think, reaching out to people that could be mentors or consultants in those fields and getting a flavor and seeing if they're a good fit for you is also a good idea, because that's a big part of, I think, what might work for someone is having, whether it's EMDR, sensorimotor psychotherapy, or DBT or ACT, having supervisors and mentors that you can learn, that you feel safe enough to learn from, and who are committed to you. I think it's a big part of what might feel right too.
Right. Okay. So having said that, in terms of, when dealing with trauma, how important do you feel it is for someone to learn, a body-based therapy?
I'm so biased, but I think everybody should learn body-based therapy, whether you think that you're working with trauma or not. I just found that it allowed me, first of all, it allowed me to be able to regulate myself in therapy sessions, which I think then helps me regulate other people in that way. So whether we're specifically working with a trauma or traumatic memories or not, me getting more connected to my present moment experience, a lot of times that's being able to kind of sense into my body, feel grounded in my feet, connect to my nervous system in different ways. First of all, is going to keep me from getting triggered and going off in different directions that are unhelpful for someone.
Right.
And allows me to be more in charge and have some agency, and hopefully attune and connect with the person in front of me, whether we're working with trauma or not. So there are other therapies, outside of necessarily somatic or body-based therapies that focus on mindfulness, but I found the ones that do specifically include the body do the best job at helping people connect to their own present moment experience.
So prior to you, and I want to ask this question before we kind of wind down here, but prior to your introduction to sensorimotor psychotherapy, when you talked about sensorimotor psychotherapy kind of bringing you into your own sense of groundedness and your own self-awareness in terms of your own body, prior to that, did you have certain experiences where maybe you felt you were triggered or you weren't as aware in your own body? Can you share with us what that was like, maybe?
I think what that ended up being like is I was typically just trying to get through the session. No matter, in some way, so that we both can get through the session in one piece is dramatic, but just because there is that sense when you're triggered that I either got to end this or we got to do something. There's a frenetic, sometimes a frenetic energy to it, or sometimes a disconnected, dissociated sense to it as well. And it was just like, okay, just figure out how to get through, which is, okay, I guess it's, maybe the safest way, and maybe the way that you're doing the least amount of harm, but you're also, you're not necessarily helping the person. So, and then afterwards, there was typically the shame when that happened, when you got out of your window of tolerance and just had to hold it together and kind of power through almost for the sake of just maybe getting through and getting by, was necessary, but also the shame of like, oh my goodness, if I can't hold it together, how can I expect to help this person? And that took a pretty big toll on just, kind of spiraling after sessions, thinking like, what am I doing? I don't know if I can be in this field. I'm not good enough. All of those things that go through your head, that then the stress, I mean, it's so cumulative, and the ripple effects from that are cumulative and very and unhelpful, to growth. So,
appreciate you sharing that. So what is the best way for people to get in contact with you, Michael?
My new email, so we'll make sure you have the right one, but Dr. Baly at ekohealing.com.
Okay.
Is that the best way?
Dr. Baly or DOCTOR?
Yeah, Dr. Baly.
Okay.
At ekohealing.com.
Got it. All right. And we'll have that linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Michael Baly, man, thanks so much for being here and sharing your experience. Awesome. Love to have you back at a later time. But
thank
really
you so much. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, man. Take care.
All right. Take care.